Agroforestry actually is you integrate the trees with the planting of crops. And the reason why you do that is because trees are very much needed in biodiversity. Because what's happening right now is there's so many monoculture systems, wherein it's actually important for us to remove that monoculture system. Another thing is trees are needed to control erosion. So besides providing habitat to plants, to animals and birds and very important wildlife, it's also needed to control soil erosion. And another aspect of trees is that there are many research right now, even what we're finding out, is that trees actually benefit the crop itself. For example, in the research we're doing in Southeast Asia, we're beginning to see some findings that many vegetables are growing better when they're planted beside trees than when they're not planted beside trees. And the reason why they were not growing before is because the spacing between trees was very narrow before, around 8 to 10 meters. So when we started experimenting in such a way that the spacing between trees was around 25 to 30 meters, the trees were synergistic with the vegetables. The vegetables were benefiting from the trees, and we believe the trees were benefiting from the vegetables. And the reason for that, some of the hypotheses we have, is that the reason why the vegetables are benefiting from trees is because of changes in microclimate. Because just like human beings, we want a cool climate. So in tropical Southeast Asian region, it's generally hot. So when there are trees beside it, then the vegetables are given a break. So as a result of that, their yield, where we have findings right now that their yield are higher. So in this case right now, the farmer has a short-term income from vegetables, and at the same time they have sort of like a savings account, a long-term income from the growing of trees. So in around 7 or 8 or 10 years, they can cut the trees for timber. And at the same time, the trees, again, are very beneficial for biological diversity and environmental benefits behind it. And there are also some trees, like fruits, that they can grow. So the farmers have income right now from fruits, and they have income from vegetables or crops. And let me add also that the trees many times act like a nutrient pump. What happens is that usually vegetables are fertilized a lot. So since vegetables are fertilized and the root zone are very shallow, not all of the fertilizers are taken up by the vegetables. So a lot of the fertilizers, they leach. So since the fertilizers leach underneath, then the trees act as a nutrient pump. The trees take in the nitrogen that was leached and take it back to the plant leaves. So what happens is there's sort of like a cycle of nutrients. That's why I'm a firm believer of agroforestry. And lastly, I cannot stop on this because another thing that's very important is our trees are very important for carbon sequestration. In other words, trees take up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and the carbon dioxide are stored in its plant parts. And as a result of that, it can be an excellent solution for climate change. And that's the reason trees and crops should be joined together. It's important to preserve rainforest. I am actually very much an advocate of biological diversity. It's very important for us to have biological diversity because since rainforest contains an infinite amount of biological diversity, whether it be birds or insects or mammals or reptiles or amphibians, it is important to preserve the rainforest because the rainforest is the habitat for those microorganisms or for those organisms. So if we destroy their habitat, just like if we destroy our own houses, then we kill them. So it's absolutely necessary for us to preserve the rainforest so that we can preserve the biological diversity. Another thing that's important is we don't know there are some medicines or there are some unknown chemicals, some unknown organisms or plants that might be beneficial to man. And if we don't preserve the rainforest, we will lose them permanently. In fact, there are a lot of species right now, whether plants or animals, which are being lost. Especially in my experience with the Philippines and in Indonesia, I can see how much devastation is happening in the rainforest. And a lot of endemic species in those countries are being lost because their habitat are being destroyed. we are having some good findings right now that there are several vegetables that can grow very well under trees. And for example, in Vietnam, there are two vegetables that we discovered that under medium light, when they're growing under cashew, they grow better than when there is no cashew tree on top of it. In Indonesia, we're discovering some indigenous vegetables, because what happened in Southeast Asian countries is that many indigenous vegetables were replaced by Western vegetables. So as a result of that, those indigenous vegetables are actually more nutritious than the Western vegetables. And not only that, those indigenous vegetables grow very well under trees. But because of Western influence, around 95% of those indigenous vegetables are gone. So we're trying to return those indigenous vegetables because we're partnering with the World Vegetable Center. They have around 50,000 germplasms. In other words, they collected the seeds or the germplasms of these indigenous vegetables, and we're returning them to the community. And that's one of the essential findings. Like right now, we have an indigenous vegetable from Indonesia. They call it katuk. And katuk is growing very, very well under trees. And putting it right now in relation to the context of gender or social sciences, katuk can be cared for by women. And that's very important because women need to be empowered in those parts of the world. So since women can take good care of katuk, that indigenous vegetable, they can sell it. They have right now pocket money. We actually call it the automated teller machine of the women, because when they want pocket money for their school needs and other needs, they harvest katuk and then they sell it to the neighbors. And from there, they have some funds to spend. And their husbands like it because they're right now earning income. And it's friendly to them because they can grow it in their gardens. The prospect for agroforestry is, I think, will grow exponentially. And because of this research, I became a firm believer of it.